Jimmy, let me just first start with you on the Elizabeth Warren news this morning that she is forming this committee. She is going to run. What impact is this going to have on politics?
Well, I think that her message is a message you're going to hear a lot throughout 2019 into 2020 from a lot of Democratic candidates. And that's two things. One, democracy is broken. We've had our elections interfered, and we have people who can't vote. And especially for Elizabeth Warren, she's going to focus on capitalism is broken, and we need to fix capitalism. There's too much monopoly, too much control by big companies, too much inequality. She's already presented a bill in Congress that would put a lot more government control or government regulation on boards, who can sit on boards. So those two themes you're going to hear from her and probably a lot over the next 12 months.
And, John, this all comes as Democrats say they've got a two-part vote set for when they come back into session on Thursday to fund some parts of the government. But as the party is kind of pulled left by the entries into the 2020 race, how does that complicate their ability to make a deal with President Trump and get this reopened?
I don't think it complicates it, Kelly. Look, we're in a process of figuring out how President Trump backs away from his pledge about building a concrete wall. We saw his former chief of staff, or his outgoing chief of staff, John Kelly, trying to cover that retreat in his interview with the LA Times, saying, we haven't been talking about a wall for a long time. And then the president refuted that on Twitter today. This isn't about money. It's about recognizing the reality that there isn't going to be a concrete wall. And the president, his rhetoric preserves that possibility, even though it's not realistic. And one way or the other, the thing's going to get settled in the next 10 days or so, I believe.
How so, John?
What I would expect is, Kelly, that when Congress comes back on Thursday, the House will pass what they've outlined as their strategy. The Senate will probably add a little bit more money to it, go from 1.3 for border security to 1.6. Senate Democrats had already agreed to that number earlier. That money is not for a wall, but it's for border security. Then they could send that back. I think the House would pass it, and I think President Trump could say, well, I got another $300 billion, and the Democrats would say, yes, but not for the wall. And I think that's a way out for everybody.
And do you think, John, just going back to the issue of Elizabeth Warren and some of these themes that are going to be discussed, we were talking already this morning about Medicare for all and, you know, how realistic it is that that becomes part of the conversation. But again, is the Democratic Party willing to kind of give this token of border security to the president at this point, or is even that going to come off the table?
I think they will be. I do think Jimmy made exactly the right points. The themes that Elizabeth Warren has outlined about politics being broken and capitalism being broken and needing repair will be dominant themes in the race. I don't expect that she ultimately is going to be the strongest candidate to carry those themes. But when I did my speakeasy interview with her a few months ago, she talked about that. She said, I'm a capitalist. I believe in markets. What I don't believe is in theft. And so she's going to make some arguments that by reforming capitalism, it will be more fair to average people. And I do think those are going to be ubiquitous arguments on the Democratic side. But I don't believe the drift of the Democratic Party, the onset of the presidential race, is going to prevent Democrats from ultimately finding a way to end this shutdown with Donald Trump.
Jimmy and John, for both of you, Jimmy, you first. What did we learn in 2018, maybe particularly from the midterm elections, that will inform the next 24 months?
Well, I think what will form is that Democrats have a very active base that wants to see them fight. I think it makes it somewhat less likely we'll get the now mythical, legendary infrastructure bill. And Democrats think, listen, we can take the White House in 2020, so let's be clear about what we stand for, the kinds of things we'd like to do if we would gain the White House and gain the Senate, and let's go out and do that. I think that is going to be their message rather than we need to get such and such done over the next 2 years.
John, what is the Democrat? As the same question to you. What did we learn in 2018 that will inform the next 2 years? But what's the Democrats' message, and who's the person who can articulate it best?
Well, first of all, I think that we learned in 2018, the Democrats were able to mobilize their base in a more effective way than some had expected in a midterm election. That doesn't mean that they'll do it again in 2020, but it suggests the possibility that they will. I don't think there will be a lot of legislating in 2019 or 2020. I agree with Jimmy. I think that there's going to be a lot of framing of arguments. But I think the Democratic message is going to be one, reining in and resisting President Trump, and they're going to get some help from the Mueller report as that happens. And then the second is going to be, how can they adjust the rules of capitalism, tax and spending levels, in order to allow more people to share in the fruits of American prosperity. I think that's going to be their argument. You know, Medicare for all is a version of that argument. I think that's going to be a difficult thing to ultimately enact because it costs a lot of money. It would require tax increases of a significant amount, even though on net, Democrats will argue that it's not more expensive than the existing system. I think that's going to be a tough sell. In terms of the best messenger for the Democratic argument, as I look at the field right now, I think that Beto O'Rourke is the most effective Democratic messenger because he has a unifying message, a hopeful message that is also progressive, but not alienating toward a lot of people who have been turned off by the Democrats in the past. We'll see if he actually runs and if he can sustain that appeal. But he showed tremendous potential in that 2018 Senate race against Ted Cruz, even though he didn't win.
Jimmy, then before we go, what's realistic to expect now with this president and this Congress this year?
Listen, I think the big news coming out from will be things that Trump does on his own that he doesn't need Congress to do. That's why trade, I think, has been the dominant economic issue. It will continue to be the dominant economic issue. It would not surprise me if all these tariffs were still in place a year from now. And I think the question is, do we get more tariffs? Because any deal they sign with China, it's going to take a while to verify. Are they complying with the tech transfer stuff? So this will be another year we're going to see a lot more of Tariff Man.
All right, guys, thank you both.
And Kelly, just to close out, the other thing that is going to be significant is the rising possibility that we may either by the end of 2019 or at some point in 2020 be moving toward recession. That's going to upend everybody's political calculations.
Yeah, everyone's debating that one already.